and clinicians and caregivers benefit from these products. So let me first start with more of an introduction. On slide 3, we have an overview of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. I was really excited to be a part of this alliance from the onset in 2017. And we've really been focused since our founding on this idea of how can we help the end users, be it the patients, the clinicians, the caregivers, the policymakers, the payers. How do we help them understand what a digital therapeutic is? How do they assess it? How do they engage with it? And how do they use it most meaningfully in everyday practice? As a baseline, it's probably helpful just to talk a little bit for a few moments around what is a digital therapeutic. On slide 4, I think it's important to mention that not all products that come in the form of a digital product are actually a wellness app. They're not all diagnostic, they're not all monitoring, they're not all therapeutic. We are really focusing our discussion today on those products that are going to be patient-centered and delivering therapy to that patient. So it's important to understand across this broader ecosystem of digital health technologies that there are a wide range of products that exist, and those that we're going to be focusing on today are really those that are therapeutic in nature. On slide 5, we talk a little bit more about what the definition is. Many of you may have seen this, but it's really getting at the notion that we're using software to directly treat a disease. So when you're using software to prevent, manage, and treat these diseases, it's really important to have a high level of rigor and quality behind the product. Slide 6 has a number of core principles that we've created as an industry to really demonstrate how intentional we are that all products that are going to be claiming to be a digital therapeutic are supported by robust evidence, that they have trials that are published and available for review, that they're making claims appropriate to what their outcomes are, and that they're able to collect ongoing real-world data and evidence. And also of interest is that they're able to have this notion of being regulated as a medical device and undergo all the pathways that are important to making sure that these are patient-centered every step of the way. So slide 7, we come back to this idea around what is our agenda. So one of the first questions that was posed was, what is the current status of regulations and commercializations for digital therapeutics in each country? While that is a broad ask, on our website, on slide 8, you'll see that we have listed already a number of countries. Our goal is to really give that understanding around what are the different ecosystems in these countries, what are their challenges, what are their levels of success, what have they been able to accomplish in terms of the regulatory environment and then the reimbursement environment and hence patient access environment for a digital therapeutic. So becoming a bit more specific, on slide 9, I provide a few examples of some regulatory frameworks that have emerged. Many different regulatory frameworks are based on IMDRF's framework of software as a medical device. It's something that's very commonly used and is actually going to be revisited, from my understanding, soon in terms of how it's been structured and how it will be structured going forward into the future. That said, the United States and Japan and Korea have all been using the SAMD framework to really enable market access pathways for digital therapeutics. Korea in particular, though, has the distinction of really being able to talk about digital therapeutics by name and call out that class of products and distinguish what is a digital therapeutic and how should it be regulated as such, which I really respected to see that evolution of the framework that's been developed. And I really look forward to seeing how it evolves in the coming months and years. In terms of the access and reimbursement component, why we talk about reimbursement so often is that these products are generally authorized by a clinician, health system, employer, or someone else that has taken a clinical look at the product to determine its applicability for the patient. Therefore, reimbursement is really important to make sure that a patient can gain access to these products, given that they're not really in a direct-to-consumer environment at this point. So the UK has been one of the biggest leaders in terms of claiming what types of evidence a digital therapeutic must undergo should it apply for market access within the UK region. What has been interesting to see over the last couple of years is that Germany has developed their own framework titled as a DIGA, which is their version of a digital health technology. Not all DIGA are DTX and not all DTX are DIGA, but there is a great overlap between those. Belgium is another example of a country that has pulled together a framework to provide access and also has laid out then the levels of evaluation criteria that all digital therapeutics and other digital health technologies must meet in order to be able to be made available to patients. And France is another one that will be coming soon. Our understanding is that it is loosely based off of the German framework, but will have a lot of its own uniqueness to it in terms of how digital therapeutics will be reviewed and then reimbursed and then accessed by patients. Moving along to another topic. One of the questions was, how will regulatory approvals in Europe and the US, how could those translate into other countries? There are a couple of examples I'd like to provide. One example is in countries that do not have their own regulatory frameworks, they may rely on other countries' pathways. So for example, in South America, a few countries have already said, if you go to the United States and have regulatory approval there, we'll just accept that and acknowledge it within our country here until we would have our own regulatory framework. There are other countries like Australia that may have an expedited framework where if you have another product regulated in a different country, they'll be able to expedite the review for that product in Australia. Another example then, the third level, would be this idea of this medical device single audit program, also talked about as MDSAP. And this is a program that at this point, I do not believe digital therapeutics currently qualify for, but it is something I'm going to be very interested to see if this does tend to emerge as a predominant model for digital therapeutics to potentially be cleared from a regulatory standpoint in countries more globally. And MDSAP has a really strong following already from a number of countries that have really been leaders in this ecosystem. So I will be very curious to see how this evolves and if this does become a possible pathway for digital therapeutics to pursue. In terms of the next question that we're asked to address is, which DTX business models have been successful? That's a hard question to answer. So slide 14 touches on an idea that I really want to convey here. So digital therapeutics have a wide variety of mechanisms of action. They have a large range of ways that they can actually address patient needs and deliver care and really ensure that patient needs are being best met. Therefore, it's really challenging to say that this is going to be one business model that will fit for all of these different products. Similarly, when you look at the disease states on slide 15, these are a large number of areas where you're looking at both mental health and the physical conditions that exist. So at this point, we haven't seen one single business model emerge that we would say this is the one that fits all digital therapeutics. You have to look at it much more nuanced in terms of what is the mechanism of action? How is the patient being delivered that therapy? Where are they receiving that therapy? In their home environment, in an acute setting? And then what types of conditions are they really attempting to treat as products? So that way then you have this better sense of, now that we know what the ecosystem is and all the complexities, then that right business model can start to emerge. So at this point, I think it's safe to say that there's no one singular business model that has been successful. That said, wherever business models are emerging, we do tend to see a lot of partnerships, be it between the government and companies, be it between payers and manufacturers, patients and clinicians working together to identify what's best for them. So either way, whatever business models are emerging, I would say partnerships that have cut across the entire ecosystem are definitely going to be a component of that. Slide 16 then brings us to a question of what are the key challenges that are facing digital therapeutics globally? Also a fairly difficult question to answer. So the next slide, I've presented this idea around how do we actually scale a new category of medicine. So digital therapeutics, they work alongside traditional therapies such as medications and in-person therapies, but they're novel in as much that they have a different way of delivering their therapy to patients. So the idea of using software is innovative, and how do we actually talk about the ways to make that a standard of care now? So from the onset, DTA, we've really been involved in this idea of setting standards and principles in the industry. That's been really the core of our industry. But then you have to look at what types of regulatory pathways exist. And Korea has taken a really strong lead on this recently, which, as I mentioned earlier, has been really encouraging to see. In addition to regulatory, you're looking at commercialization. How are market access pathways being opened up? What is that pathway that clinicians can use to be able to access these products, understand them, know how to prescribe or recommend or authorize, and then be able to deliver that to patients and then get that feedback. So commercialization is something that has to be discussed simultaneously with the other notions around regulatory and other issues here. Payer assessment is a really big one, as we've mentioned. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it's something that with decision makers being put in this position now, how do we assess what seems to be a new technology, but that fits into a system so well with these other therapies? Clinician engagement is one area that we really want to make sure that we do not overlook. So how do we actually ensure that clinicians can provide the right level of insight and advice to patients? That's a lot of education that needs to be had. So how does the government work alongside of other entities, be it the manufacturers or guideline bodies? And speaking of, how do clinical guidelines be developed to really represent and reflect digital therapeutics well? So clinical guidelines are really important in helping formalize the use of digital therapeutics in therapeutic pathways. That is another area that innovators and manufacturers have to think about as they're really talking about how can they ensure that their therapies are seen as a gold standard and either as a first or second line therapy. How do you really implement that? And guidelines are often a part of that discussion, albeit it's a few years down the road after all this data has been developed. In both the clinical and in the real-world settings. Patients are a core center focus of what digital therapeutics are and how they interact with the ecosystem. So how do you ensure that patients are receiving the optimal value and impact is really an important idea that decision makers and manufacturers need to consider throughout the entire process. And then I think the last one to mention in terms of the challenges and also opportunities is care optimization. This idea that you're using a DTX in patient care setting is a little incredible, but then also you start to realize it's just a part of therapy. But then how do you use that digital therapeutic to optimize the entirety of the patient care journey? And that is an opportunity that we haven't always had with therapies. The notion that a digital therapeutic can provide data and insights and all these other opportunities to understand how is the therapy performing, both functionally, but then also at that clinical level, really enables us as a clinical community to be able to use digital therapeutics to really optimize the entirety of clinical care. So again, challenges come hand in hand directly with opportunities too. Moving along to slide 18, a question was posed related to what are the most important factors and benefits that patients and caregivers, clinicians and payers can have as the use of digital therapeutics progresses. So the next slide, I provided a few examples from our website that really talk about how digital therapeutics can really engage and provide patients with a lot of benefit. Some of these talk about this notion that digital therapeutics can be used in the patient's own home environment oftentimes. They can be used during their schedule where it fits best. So they can work it around what their work schedule is, what their school or education schedule is, or what their other caregiver schedules may be. And it really then enables them to engage with the healthcare system in a really different way that's a bit more personal, but then also really supposed to be meeting their needs in a much more targeted way. From the clinician perspective on slide 20, we talk a little bit more around digital therapeutics' ability to extend the clinician's reach into the patient's life in between visits. So if a clinician only sees a patient every 3 months or every month, if that's a possibility, there's still gaps in there where a clinician may not be able to engage with the patient as much as they would like to. So using this digital therapeutic really is an extension of clinician care, I think is a really important perspective to provide here. And then that data that is generated by the digital therapeutic in alignment with privacy and security protocols can be provided back to that clinician so the clinician understands, this is what's been going on, this is how you've been doing, let's have a discussion about this and really determine what the best way is to move forward. So there's a lot here, I think, that we really want to focus on in terms of digital therapeutics benefits from that more global perspective. Payers. From a payer perspective, you both have that opportunity to really focus on that patient level, but then also that population level. So that's an area that you can actually have population health benefit outcomes from digital therapeutics in a way that we've never had before. Then we also can talk to different things related to improving network efficiency, looking at outcomes-based care, value-based care, member experience, satisfaction. All these other ideas are really embedded in the value of digital therapeutics. Moving on to the next topic. How much can the target area of DTX be expanded globally? So this is a question we spent a lot of time really talking about. In order to expand digital therapeutics globally, we're trying to figure out what are the current challenges that are being faced. And on slide 23, we provide some examples. One thing that we've noticed that's come to our attention pretty regularly is this idea that different health systems or clinicians or payers or even government bodies really have been focused on how do we really address this new category of medicine. And without having any harmonized frameworks to use, they're often left to their own implementation to figure out how do we assess them, what are the requirements, what levels of standards do we want to create. So with that, we've really seen this patchwork emerge of different requirements in different regions. And while that's great to see the level of passion, excitement, and interest coming from these different payers, health systems, and government levels, there really is this notion where without having some harmonization, there will be no scalability of these products, much akin to how there's scalability for drugs and other therapies of that nature. So what we've done is we've provided a first step, and this first step is really looking at this value assessment guide. Slide 24 provides an example of one of the pages in this guide, and it's an example of talking a payer, provider, decision maker through how do you even know if a product is a digital therapeutic or not. And once you know that, on slide 25, where do those products fit in the broader healthcare space? So yes, they can work along, as I said, other therapies. Sometimes you'll have a monitored or diagnostic product embedded alongside or with a digital therapeutic product. But if you're looking at it from the components alone, from a therapeutic standpoint, how do you know where it fits? And this, I think, is a really important factor for a decision maker to understand. And then we go into the fuller guide, which we really start to provide a framework related to what are some of the questions and considerations that a decision maker should be making. What does the product do? How does it do it? What are the underlying mechanisms? Are there interactions that we need to be worried about? Are there warnings or risks we should be concerned about? What are the use settings? What's the time frame? How long is this therapy used for? Is it used for a couple of days, a couple of weeks? Is it a 90-day regimen? Does it need to be prescribed in the first place? Does it need to be reauthorized? So these are a lot of questions that we know that decision makers are facing, and therefore we as UTA want to provide the first step to help understand what is that. And then the next step on the next slide is looking at implementation. So how do we actually talk about targeting patients and outreaching to them and activating the patient and then supporting them and then really engaging them through the whole life cycle of a product use? So why is this important? I think a lot of this notion relates to if we're looking at this globalized world where we're having this idea that a product could be used in different countries, yes, you need to look at what is the localization of the product, so what language is it in, what are the cultural references, making sure that the mechanisms really do meet the needs of the patients who are using it. But then, after all that's been established, how do we actually cross products globally? And I think that idea of harmonization is really a critical one to understand how do we evaluate, how do we reimburse, how do we understand the patient needs in all of this. And that leads us then into this last question. Standardization, is it required? And if so, what is DTA doing? So, as I mentioned, when I founded DTA in 2017, we knew that there was something really exciting here, and it's been incredible to see this industry grow as much as it has, and really be able to take shape in a meaningful way that really fits alongside of these other clinical interventions they're working with. So when we started, this idea of harmonization and standardization was this definition. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But looking at a definition, how do we align around what even is a digital therapeutic is important. Industry awareness is good, but then best practices and core principles and ethics are all things that we really were excited to create within this industry. That moved us along into this policy and legislative ecosystem. And one of those examples from last year was working with this product library where we're trying to provide examples of digital therapeutics that are coming to market and really be able to give people an example of what does this look like and how could it work and how could it impact me. And then now we're looking really at how do we really enable healthcare decision makers. So part of that, as I mentioned, was part of this reimbursement regulatory pathway. We're looking at helping people understand what the legislative environments are, and then study guide is a component of that too. But on the next slide, we have one example of an area that I'm really excited about. And this really looks at the international definition component. So what actually is the definition of a digital therapeutic is important for us to discuss. So one of the questions that we've received is, yes, the industry has pulled this definition together, but when you put it in light of a standards body, how would that be changed? So we've embarked upon this journey where DTA is sharing an effort between ISO and IEC to look at how can we create the definition of a digital therapeutic that can be recognizable by regulatory agencies, standard setting bodies, and others. So we are embarking on the first phase of this. And while the definition at the core is really stayed central to software impacting disease states, we're trying to really work together to make sure that this definition can be recognized globally and then used as such. So this is an effort that we've been welcoming everyone to be a part of, and we're really excited to see how this evolves. One of the next things that we are going to be doing is launching this policy coalition. So DTA, our work primarily focuses on North America, Europe, and then the Asia Pacific region. In the United States, we've been doing a number of things, one of which is helping Medicare, which provides care to generally those population aged 65 and above, with the ability to finally recognize through codes what a digital therapeutic is, and therefore then be able to provide that product to their patients. In Europe, we recently launched this coalition that we're looking at bringing together health technology assessment, HTA bodies, alongside of traditional trade associations to talk about what existing frameworks exist. How can we start to share lessons learned between these different countries as they've been developing their own pathways? And then is it possible for us to identify areas where harmonization is possible? So we as DTA are not looking to impact or change what the structures of review and evaluation are in Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and so forth. But we are looking to say, can we start to harmonize the criteria that are being used across each of these ecosystems? So that is something that we've started and are actively undertaking right now. One of the questions that has arisen from here is, could these lessons learned be applied more globally? And I think the answer is yes. But if that is the right answer, then I would love to bring in other government entities and policymakers and decision makers into that conversation to determine what does make most sense for Korea or Japan or China or India or other jurisdictions that are really taking this on in a very serious way. So as we move forward, there's a lot that we've been looking at and a lot that we're aiming to do. I really look forward to being a part of what Korea is doing. It's been incredible to see just how quickly the acceleration has happened from 2020 and onward. The industry has grown so much, and I think patients are only going to benefit from this. So I hope to be a part of any following Q&A and discussions, and I really look forward to seeing what comes next. So thank you again for the time and for inviting me to be a part of the discussion today.
강연 함께 만나보셨습니다. 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 이제 세션 2 마지막